Porphyria's Lover, written by Robert Browning, was first published under the title Porphyria in the January 1836 edition of the political journal Monthly Repository. It was republished in the book Dramatic Lyrics some 6 years later in 1842 as Porphyria's Lover, a title by which it has been known ever since. It takes the form of a dramatic monologue, which is a poem where a fictional speaker describes a situation or series of events, whilst unwittingly revealing aspects of their own character and temperament. It is Browning's earliest dramatic monologue and is the first of his poems to explore psychological abnormality. In the poem, we infer that Browning's speaker is a man, although there are no gender-specific clues. He is sitting alone in his cottage on a wild and stormy night and appears heartbroken for some reason. Suddenly, Porphyria arrives and makes the cottage warm and cosy. She sits down by his side and speaks to him. When she gets no response, she places his head on her shoulder and murmurs that she loves him. The speaker, looking into her eyes and realizing that this is indeed true, feels that he has to do something to preserve the perfection of this moment. His solution is simple. He strangles her with her own hair, and then, in a role reversal, sits with her head resting on his shoulder for the rest of the night. The title is an interesting one. Some critics have mistakenly connected her name with the disease Porphyria, one of whose symptoms is mental disturbance, such as hallucinations and paranoia. Whilst fitting to describe a man who is so mentally disordered that he thinks it a good idea to murder the woman who loves him so that she can never leave, the disease was not named until 1889, some 53 years after the poem was written, and so Browning could not possibly be alluding to it. Others have suggested that the name Porphyria, with its roots in the Greek word for purple, porphyra, is instead a hint that the lady has noble connections, as purple is commonly associated with royalty. What is also interesting about the title is the way in which Browning altered it between its first publication in 1836, when it was just Porphyria, and its later publication in 1842, when it became Porphyria's Lover. Rather than focus on the victim of the murder, Browning instead switches the focus onto the man who kills her instead. Rather than a tragic tale of a woman who loses her life, it is a case study of a man who is clearly suffering from psychosis. The poem is not broken up into individual stanzas, as the speaker presents a continuous narrative of what has happened on that fateful night. It can, however, be seen as having a two-part structure. The turning point, at about the halfway stage, is at the moment where Porphyria and her lover undergo a role reversal. Porphyria, once active, becomes passive, and the speaker, once passive, becomes active. The asymmetry of the A-B-A-B-B rhyme scheme, where there are 4 lines with alternate rhyme and then a final line which rhymes with lines 2 and 4, suggests the speaker's disordered mind. The poem has a bass meter of iambic tetrameter, didum, 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 which gives the poem a very rhythmical quality, although there are places where this varies, mostly to indicate key moments or a change of emotion in the speaker. Extensive use of polysyndeton throughout gives the sense that the events are happening one after the other, and that the way in which they unfold is inevitable. The use of enjambment and caesura throughout hints at the speaker's disordered mind as his thoughts spill over the ends of lines to then stop in the middle of the next. Although the maintenance of a regular iambic tetrameter rhythmic structure, barring a small number of trochaic substitutions and addition of extra unstressed syllables, keeps the poem moving relentlessly forward as the speaker recounts the episode in a calm and reasonable tone to its horrifying conclusion. The poem opens with a description of a storm raging outdoors. The poet uses personification. The wind is hostile as it tears the elm tops down for spite, and does all it can to vex the lake. This is a pathetic fallacy. The state of the weather reflects the disordered state of the speaker's mind as he says, "I listened with heart fit to break." Browning introduces Porphyria into the poem with a short sentence, "When glided in Porphyria." The impact of this sentence, which is also anastrophic to give Porphyria more prominence by placing her at its end, indicates the significance of the moment. Her movements contrast with the effects of the storm. She is calm and serene as she glides in, almost like a ghost. She seems to have an immediate, almost magically calming effect on the elements, as straight she shut the cold out and the storm. She has the power to distract him, which perhaps suggests that he perceives the storm as more severe than it actually is, due to his own psychological state. The speed and ease with which she apparently makes the cheerless grate blaze up and all the cottage warm is perhaps another indication of the speaker's tenuous grip on reality. Her concern for him is clear, though, as she sees to all this before her own comfort. She does not remove the dripping cloak and shawl and take off her soiled gloves until this is done. Note that the speaker is passive throughout this first half of the poem, whilst she is active. He does nothing but sit and watch, while she busies herself with the fire, takes her outer garments off, sits down beside him and speaks to him. The description of Porphyria's behaviour is actually quite racy for Victorian standards. Victorian women, for religious reasons, were expected to cover their hair or pin it up. A woman letting her hair down was considered immodest and sinful at the time, especially in front of a man to whom she was not married. The manner in which she allows her damp hair to fall is very sensual, therefore, as she indicates her sexual availability to him. Browning uses a caesura to pull the rhythm up short by introducing a pause to mark the moment at which she starts to try to communicate with him, and is our first real clue that something is not quite right. He does not answer her, but the way in which he says, "when no voice replied," implies that he has become dissociated. It is as though the voice belongs to someone else, and he is looking at the scene from the outside. Because she gets no response from him, Porphyria places his arm about her waist. He is completely passive and allows her to manipulate his body how she wants. She becomes overtly sexual as she makes her white shoulder bare and makes his cheek lie there, presumably in order to get a reaction from him. She seems to be giving him a tacit or unspoken indication that she is willing to give herself to him sexually. The speaker's repetition of yellow hair in the same sentence hints at his fixation and foreshadows her death when it is used to strangle her. Even though she murmurs how she loved him, he breaks off his description of what is happening, indicated by the dash, to focus on his own thoughts. He condemns her as too weak for all her heart's endeavour to set its struggling passion free from pride and vainer ties dissever. There is a suggestion that her pride is stopping her from following her passion. What are the vainer ties that she is struggling to dissever or cut? The reference to vanity suggests that he blames her for her excessive pride for her position. Is she from a different social class, which, as discussed earlier, might be indicated by the royal connotations of her name? Is she engaged to someone else? We don't know. What we do know, however, is that try as she might, for whatever reason, he feels that she is not emotionally strong enough to break away and commit herself to him forever. Something is holding her back, but we do not know what. Note that Browning breaks the regular iambic tetrameter that he has more or less maintained up until this point to create iambic tetrameter hypercatalectic, by adding an extra unstressed syllable to the lines ending endeavour, dissever, and ever. The breaking of the rhythm in this way strikes a discordant note and helps to enhance his sense of displeasure and frustration at her inability to leave her current life for him. Her passion has prevailed or got the better of her this evening, as she has left a gay feast to be at his side because the thought of him so pale for love of her is unbearable. The use of the adjective pale suggests that he is weakened and sickened for the love of her. Her coming to him is only a temporary interlude, however. He feels like his love for her is doomed. Her gesture is all in vain or futile. The moment at which the speaker does something active for the first time is significant. Be sure I looked up at her eyes, happy and proud. It is ambiguous, though, as to what the adjectives happy and proud are referring. Is it her eyes, or is it the way he is looking up at her? The answer may be found by looking at the way in which the poet breaks the bass metre here, by substituting the first iambic foot, didum, of the line for a trochaic foot, dumdi. The change in stress and the interruption of the rhythm indicates a turning point, which would suggest that the adjectives refer to the speaker as his mood does undergo a swift reversal. He realises that Porphyria worshipped him. This certainty that he now has about her feelings, unfortunately for her, seals her fate. The surprise that he feels at this revelation made my heart swell, and still it grew while I debated what to do. Rather than have a heart fit to break, as he had at the beginning of the poem, he is now flooded with positive emotions, and this lures the reader into expecting a happy ending where love conquers all. The first half of the poem lulls the reader into a false sense of security. There is the sublimity of nature, embodied in the awe-inspiring storm outside, contrasted with the beauty of the cosy domesticity of rural life on the inside. We have the beautiful, rich society lady, shunning the party she is at, to fight her way through the storm to visit her heartbroken, presumably poor, lover in his cottage by the lake. We are led to believe that this is just going to be another love poem, a feeling enhanced by the way in which the tone remains calm and matter-of-fact throughout. Rather than giving him optimism for the future, however, he realises that moment she was mine, fair, perfectly pure and good. Rather than being from that moment on, he means at that moment and implicitly just for that moment. Alarm bells also start to ring with the repetition of the word mine, which implies that he sees her as something to be possessed. This, however, is just the start of his objectification of her. There is absolutely no indication that Porphyria's lover is mentally ill until the moment he kills her. Her strangling is shocking due to a lack of a build-up to it, and from the emotionless way in which he describes the act. Browning makes sure that he does not even break the metre. The iambic tetrameter does not falter. His actions come totally out of the blue and are dealt with in one sentence. And all her hair in one long yellow string I wound 3 times her little throat around, and strangled her. The way in which her hair would need to be incredibly long to wrap it 3 times around her neck suggests that he is in a delusional state. The repetition in the lines "no pain felt she, I am quite sure she felt no pain," implies that he is trying to convince himself that she did not suffer, and that this is a justification for his barbaric act. Note the use of anastrophe here, which is reversed in the second part in order to emphasize the phrase, no pain. The speaker uses natural imagery in the simile, as a shut bud that holds a bee, to describe the way in which he oped or opens her closed eyes warily. Why does he want to open her eyes? Is it so that he can pretend she is still alive? What is he afraid of seeing? Is he frightened that her gaze will sting him with her reproaches? He is reassured, however, when he sees that again laughed the blue eyes without a stain. The way in which the eyes laughed convinces us that he is completely mad, as he imagines emotions that cannot possibly be there. The phrase, without a stain, implies that there is no sign of violence upon her body, and that she remains, at least as far as he is concerned, perfectly pure and good. The horror continues as he acts towards her corpse as a man would to his lover. Her cheek once more blushed bright beneath my burning kiss. The blood is returning to her face because the ligature, her hair, has been loosened. Alliteration of the plosive B sounds alludes to an imagined heartbeat, suffusing her skin with colour, but he interprets this as a blush due to his kiss. He then proceeds to manipulate the corpse so that it mirrors her actions in the first half of the poem. He propped her head up as before, only this time my shoulder bore her head, which droops upon it still. Note the use of the present tense of the verb droops. He is telling us this story while sitting there with her corpse leaning against him, which can only strengthen our feelings of horror and disgust. Of course, we cannot know if Browning had ever seen the face of a person who has been strangled, but it is hard to imagine that he would think that it would be unchanged after such violence. His speaker uses words to describe the beauty of the corpse, which would be impossible after such an act. He describes her smiling, rosy little head. His choice of language here not only is grotesque, as he perceives her death grimace as a smile, but it is also infantilizing, with the adjective little, alluding to his perception of her as a doll rather than a person. He projects his own emotions onto her, believing that the head is so glad it had its utmost will that all it scorned at once is fled, and I, its love, am gained instead. Note how he uses the impersonal pronoun it rather than she to communicate the way in which he has now reduced her to a mere object. There is irony in the way that he says, Porphyria's love, she guessed not how her darling one wish would be heard. He is implying that Porphyria would never have thought he would do what he did because it is such an ingenious solution. In reality, of course, he is absolutely right. If she had had even an inkling of how he would contrive for them to be together forever, she would not have gone anywhere near the cottage that night, or ever again. The final 3 lines of the poem are written in the present tense as he describes how thus we sit together now, and all night long we have not stirred, and yet God has not said a word. In these lines he is trying to convince us that what he has done is morally justifiable. God has had plenty of time to smite him, but has not. So he has taken this as a tacit sign of approval. The poem leaves us disturbed and horrified at the level of insanity necessary to bring about such a grotesque and terrifying incident. Thanks for watching. I'd really appreciate any questions or comments below. I look forward to hearing from you.